So we're here today with Ergert of Metomic, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Metomic.
All right, so my name is Ergert. I'm a senior product designer at Atomic. It's a startup that's more particular around SaaS security than sort of any other sort of space. And yeah, I've been at Metomic for 4 years now, and started off as I think my first foray as a designer, product designer, was actually at Metomic too. There's definitely challenges with cybersecurity product design, which there isn't that much like case studies and content online to and education online to learn from. So a lot of it is just figuring it out yourself, testing and talking to people. A lot of it's just been figuring out. Thankfully, I've got the founders are great to work with, and they're very patient with me, and they've given me lots of opportunities to grow and support. So I've been fortunate enough to really grow in this area.
Very cool. So you said that you have been there 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So how early in the process was it that you were hired and
Oh
brought in?
boy.
Were you there was it still concept, or did they have an MVP that was like designed by engineers, or tell me a little bit about that?
All right, so this was interesting. So I joined Metomic at the time. It was a cookie widget, and it was geared towards developers particularly. So it was, just like back then when GDPR was this huge thing. Everyone was just like loads of startups emerged. Like here's how you solve GDPR, and Metomic was one of them at the time. But I joined when they had decided that there was going to be a product pivot. They were like, this particular area that we're focusing on is too concentrated, and we don't feel like we're solving a big enough problem. So that's the pitch they gave to me, and they're like, to be honest with you, we don't really know what we're going to solve yet. So it was very much like, oh wow, okay, so I'm joining in, and I have no idea what I'll be designing, no idea who I'm designing for, and a lot of it was scary, but a lot of it was also really exciting because I got to do something I didn't really get to do too much of, which was at my previous job, which was I actually got to speak to people and try to find out at a very fundamental level what is the problem that they have. So I learned a lot about product during that period. So the first couple months of Metomic were just like speaking to just everyone and anyone about problems in security. So we still, obviously, Metomic as a core wanted to still focus on security because the founders felt like that's where there were problems that needed to be solved. And I was like, cool, let's go with that. So I spoke to like product managers, designers, engineers, and it took a couple of months before we finally found our footing. We found somewhere. The how we got there was also pretty interesting, right? Which was we'd ask them the question, do you have any problems in this space, right? Like, what are the problems that you're facing with it, with security? And then they'll be like, a lot of them will all have genuine, valid problems. But then comes the next part of like product design, of like startups, right? Which is, but are you willing to pay for it? And if so, how much? Right? That is an important question to also ask because how much they're willing to pay is an indication of how big of a problem it really is as well. So basically, if they pass those two criteria, we were like, all right, let's build an MVP for this, or let's focus on this a little bit. Let's experiment. Let's see where this goes. So we kind of landed on originally the concept was like a Zapier for security. Is kind of how we positioned Metomic. So you kind of plug Metomic in the middle of two things. Let's say you want to find a social security number on Slack. What would happen is Metomic finds it, classifies it, and then you're also able to, the next step of it would be, and then action it. And the action would be like redact it from Slack, or it would be notify this person that they've done this. So that was the original kind of position. And so we proposed this to, which would be our first customer at the time. First MVP that we actually showed them was actually my design. It was a design I did in Framer. And I built like this entire user flow that spanned like 6,000 different branches.
Right.
And I was like, and then so whatever question they had, or if they were curious about anything, we would be able to show them with this prototype, which was just at the time I was using Framer for this because I think Framer was competing with Figma at the time to try and replace them. And I was using Framer because their prototyping, in my opinion, was better than Figma's. And then at the end of it, they were like, this all looks great. And I made it as realistic as possible. Like I tried, like I'm as realistic as in real product as I could. And I mean in the sense that like even the drop downs, you can type in them. Like the prototypes were quite advanced. And then like at the end of it, it was like, oh, this is really cool, but what have you guys actually got? And like, so they knew we didn't actually have a product, but we were like, this is what we're actually planning to do for the MVP. So we built the MVP for them, showed them, presented it to them, passed their like proof of concept testing, and then they were like, this is cool, we'll pay for it. Then we asked, how much would you pay for it? And then they just threw like a number, and we were like, okay, that's cool. So that's how we knew, all right, we've got something here, right? Maybe not a product market fit, because you never really know if you got product market fit. Not that early anyway. So you're like, all right, this is something. So then obviously from there, it just sort of spanned into this bigger thing. And yeah, the ball has been rolling since. And there's been a lot of signing more customers, talking to them, understanding what they really want us to, like, what do they want us to do? Because in the beginning, we didn't really actually know as well. A thing that was important is we didn't actually know who our target audience was too much. Like we didn't know the niche of the specific target audience. So it was a lot of it was also discovery, like persona profiles, like just discovery, talking to them, understanding what's their day to day, really, what do they get up to, like empathizing with them. And yeah, I think since then it's been a wild but exciting ride.
That's great. I've got so many questions and places I want to go off of that story because it's great. One thing that I want to point out that I think was really cool is what I heard you say is at the very beginning you were using research to kind of figure out there's a lot of unknowns, and so the first thing we need to do is really spend some time talking to actual customers or potential customers and kind of finding out what are the problems that are worth solving. So I think that's super interesting. One question I would have is, okay, you said that you created this really elaborate prototype that
Yeah,
whatever any question they threw at it, you're like, okay, well,
I got it.
I can show them exactly how that's going to work. So let's say that I gave you a time machine and you can go back 4 years. What would you do differently now that you have 4 years of experience under your
Oh
belt?
boy. So, there'd be a lot. First of all, I wouldn't make it so elaborate. Would be number one. But like, I think the big thing I would do is I would simplify it a lot more. I think what I was really trying to do is I was trying to impress by how like analytical I can make it look and like, almost feeding a little bit my own ego. Like, I can do a lot on this, I can really make it feel like a lot of a product. But obviously every aspect of it was what I thought at the time, this would be useful, valuable for them. But now I would simplify it so much more because I've got a much clearer idea of what I think majority of them right now care about the most. And I think a lot of it is actually centered around the data, but more also about who's causing it.
Mm.
Like who's causing the angle? What are the trends? Also, like what are the unknowns? Like, and I think that's what a lot of customers use Metomic for. It's about the discovery of the unknowns and also being able to fix those unknowns. So like being able to solve them and automate them. Because fundamentally what the tool is really trying to do and the use case we're trying to solve is we're trying to save them time. But I guess that's every B2B product really, right? You're trying to cut them and save them time. But one of the most like menial tasks for like a lot of security personnel, like I say security is a vague term because we've got like power users that go from like legal to all the way to like what you'd expect, like security analysts. You can get like CISOs, and it also really depends as well what stage of the company they're in as well. So like if for example they're a startup, like they're a 1 or 2 man security team, they have less time to spend on the product because they have bigger fires to fight. So they would love it if the product helped them a lot more. So like just like recommendations on what to find, how to use the filters that we have, like like maybe break things down for me better. And then you've got like the big like the users in much bigger companies that like just give me granular controls. Give me all the power Metomic possibly can to find anything I want, no matter how minuscule it is. So it varies from that. And they're both like for us equally valid at this point. Like we're trying to serve and fit both use cases, which is also a challenge in its own right too. Like how do you make a product very simple to use, but also very possibly complex? So yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Security products, a lot of times by their nature,
Yeah.
tend to be complex, right? You've got power users who are wanting to dig really deep into the details. And then you've got other users that are just very task oriented. They just want to come in and do the 1 or 2 things that allow them to use your tool and then get back to their real job, right? So how do you balance those 2 things?
So the way I do it is I would always show the most important information first.
Yeah.
That serves both of them. And then if they want to, they can dig deeper, and all that information is there for them. But it's not the first thing they see. They would need to demonstrate intent if they want to see more. So that would be my way of doing it. Like I always constantly ask myself questions like, is this the right information that I'm actually displaying? Like, is this, so the way I see it, right? When I do any feature, when I design any feature, I always think about three things. So I think about, what problem am I solving with this feature? Who am I solving it for? And also, what does success actually look like for this feature? So for me, the metrics of success also sort of go into what is the actual end result here? What does success look like for this flow, for this user, for this feature? And usually I like also getting it to the point where I can also possibly track at the end. Like actually track metrics of, so for example, if it's like it ends with them taking a specific action, I would then, for example, ask like an engineer to like make sure that gets tracked. Like if they could also add a tag to it to make sure it gets tracked. So that would be like the way I would begin the I guess the thinking phase of a feature. Those would be the three things I always ask myself.
Yeah, those are great, and it sounds like you actually type those out
Yeah.
into. You mentioned Framer before, but now maybe you're on
Yes, I'm big on
along with
Figma
everyone
now.
else, right? Yeah.
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 Pretty
Everybody
fun.
eventually made their way to Figma, and until something else comes along, that'll be the new great thing, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So you actually type it into the document that's there to kind of as a visual reminder of those three things.
Yeah, because you can get lost in those pixels. You know,
Yeah.
they're hypnotizing. And I also sometimes get trapped in overthinking on edge cases as well. I keep forgetting that an edge case is an edge case, for example, right? Like, obviously, whatever your flow is, it should accommodate edge cases, but you're really trying to accommodate the common case here. Like, that's actually what's important.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying that you're talking with customers a good bit. So what percentage of your time would you say? Because again, you're having to wear both hats, right? Like the UX research person, then also the UI designer. And so what percentage of your time would you say you spend on wearing each of those hats?
That's a very good question. So my answer would be not enough. It's always going to be not enough. Even though I speak to them
Right.
like 8 hours a day, probably not enough. But I mean, what I tend to do is, so we have like where we work, we have a great like CS team, and they're super product focused. So generally, what I tend to do is for like the basic sort of feedback loops, they kind of loop me in and loop like the rest of like the product team in, which also includes engineers. If for the really more conceptual pieces, I would that's when I would like be like, hey, can I speak to these customers? Can you book a meeting in for me and this customer? Because I want to show them something, especially when I know succinctly what their problem is. Like I know exactly what, and I really want them to test it out. I never really show them wireframes. I always try to show them as something that looks as realistic as the actual product they use as possible.
Okay.
So I just always found that if you show them wireframes, you don't want to ruin that illusion. So and wireframes can be useful, but like people need visual guidance a lot more. So for me, I always just go with like actual mock-ups of the product.
That's interesting. That was going to be my next question is how do you balance, or how much do you use lower fidelity sketches or wireframes versus higher fidelity? And it sounds like you're saying you almost always use the higher fidelity.
For customers, yes. Internally, for stakeholder meetings and so on, yeah, you can go as abstract as you want. Really, you can go like notepads and drawings and stuff, and be like, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking." And I've done that a few times as well, where I've been like, just scribbled a flow really quick, and been like, "What do you guys think of this potential flow?" I think for like obviously like there's definitely like value in wireframes. I think there was a bit of discourse actually, because a lot of designers just skip the wireframe phase, which I respect too. But like for me, I guess it depends on like how big of a feature am I building, and also like it's important to loop in. This is also what I learned from experience. It's really important to loop in stakeholders as early as you can as a designer,
Sure.
because what really matters, their feedback really matters. But also they want to feel part of the journey too. They also want to feel part, like they're also contributing towards it being designed. And that's important, like that. But you get, that's boosts morale, but it also not only just boosts morale, but it also helps with just like they also become an advocate for what you want to design too, right?
Yeah, and I've got a friend that uses the phrase kind of leveraging all of the brains, right? So
Yeah,
not
exactly.
only are they involved in spirit, but they're actually involved, right? Like
Yeah.
they're contributing ideas. They say, oh, you know what? here's what this is missing. Have you thought about this? Because I've talked to these customers that the research side hasn't, or I've got this life experience and we should consider this. And you're like, oh, I didn't even know about that. I should put that into the design or into the product, or do some testing around
Yeah.
that.
Like, because I'm like a one-man design team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Atomic. Absolutely have to leverage other people. Like, it's just because then you get like, they also have helped me. Like, they've picked me out of like rabbit holes that I dug myself into as well. Right? Like, crap, I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't know what to do here, and I don't have other designers to like lean on, other product designers. But I have a lot of, maybe I don't have designers, but I do have a lot of product-minded people that can help.
That's right.
So like, yeah, I have to lean on them a lot, and like the product wouldn't look and feel the way it is now if it wasn't for them. Like, whenever someone gives me full credit, I'm always like, I feel almost guilty, because it's like, yeah, sure, I designed it and I'm obviously accountable for it, but like, it wouldn't look this way, it wouldn't flow this way if it wasn't for like this person's suggestion or that person's suggestion. So it's yeah, definitely for, especially if you're like on your own and you're working in like a startup, like as a designer, leverage everyone, leverage everything, and like test with them as well, like test flows with them. If they might not be able to contribute from like the problem solving side, they can contribute with actually testing the flows to see if the user experience of it, matches well, if it flows well.
Yeah, I was going to use an American football analogy, but I think it might be better for me to use a football analogy, right? So there's the person who puts the ball in the back of the net, right? Yeah. But the people who made the passes to create space and kind of get the ball to where you have the advantage for that striker to shoot the goal, like those are an important part of it too, not just the person who puts it into the goal, right? So all of those people help you get from one end of the pitch to the
big time.
Yeah,
big time. Like, yeah, it definitely takes a team for sure. Even design takes a full team, even if they're not designers.
That's right. And I personally try to reject this notion that there are certain types of people are creative and designers, right? Like not everyone is going to be able to be the ones who are making those final touches on the design, the actual at the pixel level, right? But I've had great insights come from people who would not consider themselves to be creative, would not consider themselves to be designers, and they've got some boxes and arrows on a piece of paper, and are like, yes, that's the insight that I need in order to create something, right?
Yeah. I fully agree with you. I genuinely believe everyone is creative, really. I think, yeah, it's just the way you apply your creativity, right? It's just, that's it. So I agree with you. I totally reject that notion as well. Like for example, like my partner, she always says, "Oh, I'm not creative at all." Like, she's like a scientist, but then the way she explains, or like the diagram she'd create, and like the diagrams are like really well and thought out, like in the sense like it's easy for me, who doesn't know anything about science, like anything about like biochemistry. I can understand what this is trying to explain. And it's like, that's creativity. And like, yeah, and it's always weird. I think loads of people just associate creativity with like arts, right? And it's definitely beyond just that. It's much more abstract, and it's much more of an umbrella term.
I 100 agree. So I want to push back on one thing that you mentioned before, yes. Kind of like always showing high fidelity mockups. Do you feel like you get different feedback from customers when you're showing high fidelity mockups versus showing something that maybe is a little more lower fidelity, where they'll speak more on the concept or the flow of things rather than fonts or colors or buttons or things like that? Do you find that you get the feedback that maybe you're getting feedback on the higher fidelity aspects rather than more conceptual things?
See, I thought that would be the case originally. So like when I started off like my journey into product design, like I read like a bunch of just articles and sort of listened to a bunch of people's thoughts. And that's one of the things I expected as well. But like most of the time I've actually had it the other way around, where the wireframes I would show them would actually be more confusing to them. Yeah, it is interesting. I found it the same as well. I don't know if I've just been unlucky. Maybe I need to keep doing it and just really try and get them like out of their comfort zone and like show them just flows and really involve them in that like iterative part of the process. Because if the customers feel like they're also influencing the design, they also become advocates and big advocates of the product, and they buy into the whole philosophy and the whole journey and vision that like Metomic's trying to solve. So that's true. I mean, maybe I need to experiment with them more. You're right. It could be I've closed that lane off too early.
It's always good to experiment, right? Like, because honestly, you're challenging me. I'm thinking, well, maybe because we do a lot of low fidelity. So we have had a situation where there's a big green button. We want people to click that, right? It's an easy button that's going to it's going to close down all of the permissions that have never been used, right? So it kind of, you're instantly in a better security posture. But what we found when we showed it to people was they're like, yeah, that sounds scary. Like, if I click this, what if it shuts off a bunch of engineers and then from doing their work, and then I get fired, right? So we were like, okay, well, we need to give them confidence that this button is not going to do bad things. And so came up with an idea of a modal that would pop up that just explains, gives more details of what's going to happen. And so I remember, like, it was literally just a Sharpie sketching out what the words would be and showed that to a client just because of speed, right? Like, that's something that I could do in 10 minutes and show to a customer and get feedback on that. So, but now you've kind of challenged me to think, well, maybe I would get better feedback if we did spend a little more time and make it where it was higher fidelity and it looked like it was a legit thing rather than an idea of a thing.
So like, I mean, that's super interesting because I actually have a very similar story to that.
Okay.
Very similar story to that. We called it the nuke button because it can essentially be like a nuke button. When I've shown like hi-fi flows to customers, I feel like the user experience side of it becomes a lot more obvious and clearer to me than if I was to show them wireframes. So for example, if I want to optimize, like does it feel intuitive to them, right? Then for me, showing them high fidelity and seeing, so what I do is actually give them the prototype and I would just tell them really basic things, right? And basic user testing, right? I'd be like, you need to get to here. From here, get to there. Go. No help. Nothing. If you need help, you can ask for help. So I would see how they would do it. And the best way to do that is with high fidelity mockups. And also from what I've learned, if I show them like the nature of wireframes is you're going to kind of clarify the main bits because that's the main flow. So like, if the button is the start of your flow, you're going to outline the button, but then probably like scribble the rest. So you're naturally going to be drawn to the button. So like for me, when it comes to like, how do I test the user experience, not improve it? How do I test it? It would be with high fidelity mockups and during like user testing sessions. That would be kind of like the reason why I show them, because I also want to show them that we've given time and thought behind this concept that we're exploring. And like, we'd love to sort of like hear their thoughts on it. And maybe even in a subconscious level, it might mean that they're more willing to spend a little bit more time trying to help you figure it out as well. But then again, I think I think the way the example you specified there, I think is also very valid to use wireframes, 100%, because you've got feedback, which is, this feels like I'm going to take, if I press this button, it feels like it's going to happen straight away. And then, for then you would just sort of it makes total sense that you just sketch what the friction point would be, right? The necessary friction point.
Yeah, I guess my thing is, I don't see them as being mutually exclusive. We're going to do this or this. It's always let's say that we're going to create some mockups and we're going to test them 1 week from today. What is something we could test tomorrow to see if we're moving in the right direction? Because it could be that we change some stuff in from day 6 to day 2 to day 7, right? But then it's always a challenge of getting people to test with. Is that something that you've had trouble with too?
Yes. And also the thing is the security, obviously because I work for a startup, you don't have much of a pool as well to work with. So that's why like I treat their time as gold for me. And like, because that's the thing that like is really just by its nature kind of lacking in like kind of cybersecurity B2B space for like startups. It's like you can't really depend on quantitative data. You have to depend more on qualitative data. So because like, if you've got like, let's say 60 customers, if for example 30% of them went this way and 20% of them went that way, like how, like, does that really show me what's the best flow? Like, it's too small of a sample size. That's what it feels anyway. I might be wrong there. Maybe that is a big enough sample size. But again, like, still figuring it out. So for me, I depend a lot on qualitative feedback. So like actually talking to them, asking them questions, trying to get on a call with them, get them familiar with my face, get them, but at the same time being very conscious and precious with their time, because I know how just from like the persona profiles we've built and the things I've heard, I know how precious their time is.
Sure.
So it's definitely, it's definitely a challenge for sure. Yeah, but it's also, maybe I'm lucky. I get some really good customer feedback, very succinct as well. I think just security, like, people are very to the
Yes.
point. So, and I love that quality personally. And
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
I
Do you
prefer.
ever, how much testing do you do with people who are not customers, but fit your customer profile, right? So prospects, or just even people that are, they might not even, well, I guess it depends. Like, I was going to say people who are not even this in the security space, but that can be, I know that that can be tricky, right? Like, there's some stuff that you can test with people that are not in the security space, but a lot of the stuff that we're doing is just going to be so foreign to people who this isn't their world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, so actually I tried and tested out this tool called usertesting.com. And it was, the things I was trialing out as well were like very kind of like basic flows. Like, hey, can you just do this for me? Just, it's like just testing out like the very core basics of like what you should feel is intuitive, like naturally intuitive, just from
Mhm.
like anyone who's got like any experience using anything really, including like just social media or anything, we should figure this out basically. And so when I tried testing it on user testing, and you, by the nature of it, you can actually like get it down to like a specific demographic if you want. So I did, like and also you can also ask them. I forgot in the beginning of every survey they ask you like those catch out questions.
Mhm.
Yeah. So like for example, like, hey, if you're really in security, then you're gonna answer this correctly, right? And it's only people in security get. So once if they've passed through all of that sort of funnel and they've made their way into the actual user testing, this sort of this, you're expecting it to be good quality, right? Like you're getting the exact people you want. But I just found that I kept getting I'm pretty certain they just somehow managed to find my prototype, because I'm certain this person's not in security or in IT, because I just know they're not from like just the way that they like you. For example, one thing I would do is, hey, can you select this row for me? And they just couldn't figure that out from that go. And I'm like, okay, is that my fault? You have
Am
to
I
really
that
start
bad?
questioning really basic fundamentals. Like, is this correct? Is it my fault? I grew up somewhere, like, because I've not had this problem from actual customers. Like, no customer's ever been like, hey, I'm struggling to figure out how to select a row. They've just done it, right? Like, I think this is a really good quote that I really like. I forgot who says it, and I'm probably going to butcher it. But I do remember the main quote of it, which is like, great user experience is when it's invisible, and when it's not, like, that's when you should worry. When you notice things, that's when you should sort of worry, right? So I guess, yeah, like the whole like, it's just, it needs to feel intuitive, like it's innate, like it's natural for you to know where to go next. So that's when I get sort of, that's my exciting moments, when I share a prototype with someone and they just know exactly what to do and they just do it, and I'm like, all right, nice
Yeah.
little pat on the back. That's the dopamine hit for me. That's when I get the rush.
It's the best feeling, right?
Oh, it is
Like
big
when
team.
you do something that is kind of complex and you're thinking, I think this is going to work. I think people are going to get this. And then it's the scariest, but also the most exhilarating thing to show it to people. And they say, oh, well, wouldn't I just click right here? It's like, yes, you would.
Yeah, I know, it's so crazy. Like, it's, and when I'm doing that kind of testing, I don't speak at all. I just let them. I don't want to influence any decision they make, even if they're clicking the wrong place and there's that awkward like 40-50 second silence. I don't care. Like, until they say, okay, I need some help figuring this out. That's when I'll help them out, right? That's when I'll intervene. But other than that, I'm just gonna see and figure out how long it takes them to get a good gauge of the time it takes for them to complete the flow. But that also isn't the best metric sometimes. But like, just sort of, even that 30 seconds they took to figure out, that's valuable for me to know. Like, I
Sure.
need that information is super useful for me. So yeah, that's why session recordings as well are massively helpful for me, especially if you don't have a big sample size. You need to be consuming as much like information and seeing how customers use the product as much as possible. I wish Metomic was the size of Facebook and we had thousands of security people,
Right.
everyone using the Metomic. So then I have all of this knowledge and all of this data to just digest and consume. But You only get, you don't get much. So you got to work with what you get. Like that's another learning I had to pick up.
Absolutely. Another thing, going back to the very first kind of when you were setting up your story at Metomic, it seems like from the very beginning you were involved in the business thinking side of things, and it sounds like there's great communication. You mentioned your customer success team is kind of sharing what they're learning, and you're sharing, and you have access to the founders and kind of the product visionaries, and so I'm sure to begin with, there was a smaller team. Now you're a team of 45. That's pretty good size. It's hard to get everybody together, right? You don't want to have a meeting about meetings, right? So what advice would you give to someone who is in a position like you that maybe has trouble getting access to the business, being able to kind of weigh in on the business thinking or understanding the business thinking in order to be able to do your job well?
I just tend to almost, maybe it's a bad thing, but like, I'm just nosy as hell. So I want to be like, hey, so, and then I'd always try and, I guess, maybe butt in more than I should, where it's like, has marketing maybe thought about approaching it this way? Like I'm that kind of guy.
Okay.
But like, but for its faults, and I'm sure there are faults with that, but like, there are like times where I learn a lot from them and they learn a lot from me, because I think in the company, there's like, even though it's like 40 people, there's only really a select few within the company that are very familiar with the product, like what it's actually capable, what use cases, sort of like what are the niche use cases it fits. And like marketing, for example, approaches me all the time where they're like, hey, does Metomic fit this use case? So then, because I don't really expect everyone in the company to know the inside out of every bit of the platform.
Sure.
Because at this point, it's quite a robust platform and there's a lot to it. So they come to me for help, and then I go to them for help, and it's just sort of like they learn a lot about the product. And for example, with like, we have a content writer, like I had to lean on her a lot for like grammar checking the product, being like making sure that things make sense. Does this read well? Yes, it does. And in that process of her helping me, she learned a lot about the product, the terminology that we use, what certain things mean, and she's going to then take that and apply it to her content writing work. So it's just sort of, you help someone and they help you, kind of. So I always just throw myself out there and be like, does anyone need any help with this? Or even, I don't even ask the question sometimes, like, do you want my help with this? Can I help you with this? Can I do this? So I just throw myself at all facets of the business, basically.
I think that's fantastic advice. A lot of times designers can sometimes feel like they should just stay in their lane, right? And they're afraid to weigh in on in other areas, right? Like, I'm a designer. What do I know about sales? But I love your advice that you have there of like, just say, hey, how can I help you do your job better? And what do I need to know from you in order to do my job better? Because if you're creating a better product, then that's going to make it easier for sales to do their job. And if sales is selling this product, then there's more users for you to be able to test with, and more feedback. Okay, that is a signal that the thing we're creating is valuable if people are willing to pay for it, right? So it can be a thing. It's this virtuous cycle, right, where you're helping one another. And if everyone's siloing information, then it makes it more difficult for everyone, right?
Yeah, I've always tried to be as collaborative as I possibly can, because God knows I need the help sometimes as well. It's really sort of what it boils down to as well. Sometimes where I can see that like sales needs a little bit of help in this area, and I know how I can help make their life easier. So I'm gonna just do it. Like, I can spare a few minutes or maybe an hour or two to even if it's like, and I hate doing this because I actually, I did this a lot at uni, because I did design at college and then university, and then sort of obviously as a career now. But I did like a lot of like brand design as well, sort of as I was sort of finding my feet. And so I still, even now, actively help out with brand design. So giving them graphics, helping them with helping marketing with graphics, helping sales team with their decks. Like I've got a really good graphic or a really good product screenshot that I think would really work well with this. In a lot of ways, design touches all facets. Product design can touch all the facets. Especially when you don't have like your product manager, or like so we don't have like a product team. We just have loads of people in different departments who are,
Okay.
like, for example, we have like a sort of a product go-to product person in the sales team and in the CS team and also the engineering team. Well, most of the engineering leads are part of the product. We call it the product guild. I'm part of the product. Like, it's just all of these people are sort of like feeding information into each other, which
Yeah.
at the which hopefully at the end means sales can sell better, CS can support customers better, engineers can empathize with customers better, or prospects, and know what needs to be built and can buy into it. It's all of these sort of things just interconnect.
Very cool. Yeah. No, that's great insight. All right. So I've got one more question for you here. This
Yeah,
is
hit
this
me
has
with
been
it.
so insightful. One of the things that I've seen, and maybe you've seen this too, is that maybe in other industries, UX research and UI design is brought in pretty early, right? Like maybe
Mm.
one of the first 10 hires, or maybe even the founding team. I've seen that that's not necessarily the case as often in the security side of things.
Yeah, well,
So
you can tell when it's not the case.
right, exactly. So
You can tell.
and of course you and I are going to have a biased opinion of that. But if
Yeah,
we were
that's
going
true.
to give advice to an early stage security company about what they absolutely need to get right early in UX research and UI design, what would that be?
This sounds really basic, but just sort of understanding the problem and not forgetting it.
Mm,
Like, and also like who you're solving it for, and also it's okay if you don't know exactly who, because you're never really gonna know the exact specific person. Like,
mm,
so I suppose it would just be for me. The main thing I would try to be like is don't worry about product market fit too much like that early. Like, just worry about like if getting that first customer. To be honest, that helps a lot.
okay.
But also like it depends because it also depends how much is that customer willing to pay. For example, if you get like a team that's going like, yeah, all right, 5 figures, I'll pay it. Just
Hmm.
solve this problem for me. It's very different than like, for example, if you're trying to sell to like um, something that's been valued at like $20 or $30 a month, right?
Hmm. Sure.
So, but I guess for me, Metomic, and this is very specific, a lot of his gut feeling as well. Like, are we onto something here? Like, is this actually like, is this something in this? And you feel it almost like that there is something there that like they're saying the right things, and you see their frustrations and you see their relief as well sometimes, and like and in the beginning, like picking up on those things and like really seeing how much of a problem it is for them.
Mhm.
Like, is this an actual hair on fire problem with them? And you'll know because they're willing to throw a shitload of money at it.
Sure.
Basically, that's kind of like, especially in the cybersecurity space.
So to read that back, I think what I heard you say is that whether you have someone who has UX research in their title, you should be doing one of the first things you've got to make sure you nail is do the customer research to find out who your audience is and what their problems really are. And if this is a really big problem, like one of the questions I like to ask is like, so we've talked about this problem. Is this like a top 10, something that you want to accomplish this year? Is this in your top 10 list?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, what number is it? And so that has been a good question for me
That's
on
a great
to
question.
find out how, is this an aspirin problem or is this a vitamin problem?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very good framing actually. I think the way we framed it, I mean, it's 4 years ago now, so I'm sure I'll remember. But the way we framed it was like, I think it was just pretty much. So how big of a problem is this for you?
Mhm.
Like 1 to 10, right? Like kind of basic sort of measurement. And
That's
the
the same
ones that
question, right?
it's a simple question,
It's
yeah,
a
one to
very
10.
similar question. Yeah.
10, and you'd even be like 10 being, yeah, like this is a hair on fire problem. Like
Right.
I'll go, and then one being like I can live with it, right? And
Hmm.
then just give me any sort of metric from there, like, and then they would that like whatever ranks the highest is it sounds very basic, but that's probably the path you should go. But also, what matters
Hmm.
is your gut feeling as well, because a lot of in the early stages, you kind of have to go with your gut because you don't have much else to go on that
Sure.
early. Obviously, you wanted to talk as many customers as possible, but a lot of the times you're also going to have to wing. At least as a designer, you're going to have to just rely on existing patterns or a good thing that I do as well. I don't know who said this probably, but like this quote, I pretty much my philosophy for design, which is I'm not a quote person, but I'm just bringing that out here. I know it sounds like I'm a quote person because I'm bringing out a second quote here, but this one's like, I think this is for everyone who's this quote, which is, good designers copy, great designers steal. And I do that a lot. So I depend a lot on like products that have like, I personally feel like have nailed their specific niche well. And also like there is a synergy to the problem I'm trying to solve, the problem that they've already solved or are further along in the process of solving it than I am. So like I lean a lot on that. So like there's a lot of like, okay, let's see how, and sometimes it could be the most random product. You get inspiration from like the most random places. And it could be like, for example, like linear would be sort of one that I see like there's a lot of inspiration, like because they have loads of condensed information, and they the way they lay it out is easy to sort of read and flow in my experience. So like I'm like, okay, I see the way linear did this. I see how they've done it because you can kind of break down the anatomy of what they've done,
Mm-hmm.
and then just be like, I'm gonna see if I can steal this, like I'm gonna see
Yeah.
how they did this. And then like the same would go with different other products as well, like Zapier as well. I've had to steal a lot from for their
Sure.
like work because they have a flow, right? They have a workflow builder, so it's like let's see what they do well with the workflow builder. Let's see what doesn't work with it, and I'd steal that. A lot of stealing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be the main thing because you got to get your time, you got to spend your time wisely. So
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, and I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that has been really valuable for us is, I don't know if you've ever gone through the Google Ventures Design Sprint by Jake Knapp, but one of the exercises they have in there is called a lightning demos. And so like each team member, you say, hey, here's this problem we're trying to figure out how to solve. And then whoever's on the product team that we're meeting with will say, I want you guys to take 20 minutes, go and find some inspiration piece, find up to 3 things, come back, and you have 60 seconds to kind of show, hey, here's the screenshot, here's what's cool about it, and here's, that basically that's really all you have in 60 seconds, right? Here's this thing, here's what it does, and here's what's cool about that I think could be inspiring to us. And then you move on to the next one. No feedback, no nothing. The next person says, here's this thing, 60 seconds, 60 seconds. So then, if you've got 3 people, then if they've got 2 examples each, in 6 minutes, you've got 6 different things that you can look at and say, oh, okay, I understand how we can kind of remix some of this stuff. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, right, you can kind of see patterns that are out there. And the great thing is users they understand these patterns because they've already used them, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what matters. It's the familiarity for me. It's like, I know if I use this pattern, I have obviously assumptions are dangerous, but like I'm gonna assume they're gonna successfully complete this flow, and it'll feel intuitive for them. One of the bits of feedback that we get is the user experience the UI, the interface feels nice to use, and the user experience feels good. Like they know what to do, and like for me, like that's great. Especially because I can only see flaws in the product personally.
We're too close to it, right?
We're way too close to it. Like for me, I'm the best at bad mouthing the product. And so like, yeah, it's refreshing to hear it from someone who it solves a problem for.
Absolutely. The doing the customer research and talking with them. Yeah, I think that's critical. And, go off of your assumptions of we know what our users want at your own peril.
I think it's important to have a vision, right? And that vision feeds the product roadmap to a good degree. Obviously, the customer feedback, what the market is also saying. There's so many factors that feed into a product roadmap.
And validate that, right? Like make assumptions and lean on your business experience that you have, but why not then go and validate that with real customers to make sure, like if you get 70% or 90%, if 90% of your assumptions are right, that's awesome. Let's make adjustments to the 10% and let's make it even, we can get there faster, right? So
yeah, exactly. There is another bit of advice, actually, I would say.
Okay.
It would be make sure you don't forget about the table stakes. So what I mean by that. So yeah, so the table stakes, I mean like, so there's like, obviously you've heard of tech debt, right? So there's also like a lot of design debt too. So when you're a startup, you have to build fast, right? You're not really thinking. So there's 2 concepts. There's obviously MVP. So at Metomic, we picked up this sort of new term, but we've been using it for about a year now, which is MLP, so it would be minimum lovable product instead of minimum viable product, because the viable product can sometimes be an awful user experience. So we have like, or it solves a problem, but it does it in a way that's just not nice. It's just not great. So by table stakes is, I mean, don't forget about how important and integral it is to come back to the basics that you might have overlooked in order to build quickly. Like a good example would be, I'm trying to think of one that's design related. Because the way I like to work is I always create two different iterations.
Okay.
So I create what I call the skateboard version and the rocket ship version. So
Okay.
so I always design the rocket ship first. So this for me would be like, this is the ideal. This is what I'd love.
Mm-hmm.
And then engineers would look at it and be like, this is insane. So I adapted there. So I'd go like, this would be what I want. And then they were like, we can do 10% of that. So I'm like, okay, so now I need to think about like the skateboard. What does the bare minimum version of this look like? So I do with rocket ship first, because when you finally get down to the skateboard version, it's so much easier to build up to that, because you've already established how you want it to look. The rocket ship version, like the skateboard version, is always going to be the skeletal version of what the rocket ship is. So as long as the skeleton still serves the main purpose and it can be scaled up and built up to the rocket ship, so always design with scalability in mind, basically. Is another. That's just another one that's probably like really basic, but like it's really important. And that's like my method of making sure I stick to that is always build two different iterations, but build the best version you can think of for that time, for how for whatever, for all the knowledge that you have about that problem. Build the best first iteration that you can, and then like build backwards, strip it down to what the engineers will finally go, I can build this. I can build this in the cycle. Yeah, I can do this.
Exactly. Versus I can build this. It's going to take 8 months.
Yeah, exactly. So we're trying to do everything in cycles, right? So like, okay, fine. This is available to be done in 2 weeks. Perfect. Good. Sign off. But don't forget to come back to it at some point, because it'll come back to bite you. It will come back to bite you. So I guess I don't know if that's useful advice as well, just from my experience.
That's fantastic. So, man, it has been so great talking with you today and kind of getting some insights. Hopefully we're going to have more conversations with folks like you and get more knowledge. And then all of us that are at this intersection of UX, UI, and cybersecurity. See, I'm talking with my hands now. We can all.
It's infectious.
It is, right? But hopefully we can all just get better at what we do and learn from one another. So thank you so much for your insights today. This has been super, super helpful to me. And I'm sure it'll be super helpful for everyone else as well.